Welcome to the PlantFit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby, and today we have Damien Mander. Damien is an Iraq War veteran who served as a naval clearance diver and special operations sniper for the Australian Defence Force. He's also winner of the 2019 Winsome Constance Kindness Gold Medal and the founder of the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, the IAPF, based in Africa. We start the conversation with Damien sharing about how his journey into conservation began. Enjoy the presentation.
My background was Australian military. I served as a clearance diver, which I suppose is Australia's version of the US, or the closest thing that we would have to SEALs. After September 11, the Australian government formed what they termed the first and last resort for a terrorist attack on home soil, which was Tactical Assault Group East, a special operations unit with the Commando Regiment. I went across there, naturally being a diver, went into water platoon, and I'd been there for only a couple of days and told I was going on to sniper training to transfer across to sniper platoon. Did my training part. It was, toughest thing I've ever had to do in my life is to get through that. Got through it. Went online with Australian Special Operations, served my time there. I then actually transitioned into the private sector, went to Iraq working as part of coalition efforts over there. And initially just were working with the Australian government who were rebuilding a legal system that was going to trial Saddam Hussein. So it was quite interesting. My job was from a security standpoint, getting these subject matter experts from A to B around Baghdad for the various meetings and workshops that were taking place. But just being a fly on the wall and listening to some of those conversations, some of that stuff was sort of history making. And then I transitioned across into a training role with an organization called BLP. We're training Iraqi police. Now, one of the biggest mistakes, I think, of the Iraq War, other than going there in the first place, was the Iraqi army and the Iraqi police force were disbanded overnight. So essentially, 1 million people put out of work. They just happened to be the 1 million people that knew how to, where all the weapons and explosives were and how to use them. And I think that was when the insurgency really started rising up in 2005, which is when I arrived there. So one of the responses to try and fix that was to go and train battalion-sized groups of people, often low literacy, recruited from rural areas around Iraq. There was very little consideration given to their cultural background, whether they're Sunni or Shiite. They were mixed together, formed up as a unit, given a uniform, a gun, and sent out to an area. And it was an absolute disaster. Everywhere we sent a battalion of people that weren't from that area, we created havoc, more conflict. And I suppose that my big lesson, my big takeaway after 3 years of working in Iraq and eventually working in management roles and as project manager for the Iraq Special Police Training Academy in northern Baghdad, the biggest takeaway I got is that you can't send in groups of foreign forces. And when I say foreign, not necessarily international forces, but people that are not from a local area. You can't send in groups of armed forces to police an area and expect to have a long-term good relationship with the local population. I left Iraq around the beginning of 2008 with very little sort of direction. I'd done quite well financially by that stage. I'd been investing in residential property for almost a decade then, at the time when Australia was going through a property boom. So I'd done well. I didn't need to work for the foreseeable future. I'd served in some of the most elite military units that we had. I'd survived 3 years at war. And in my mind, as someone who's quite young, I'd done pretty well and given myself a well-deserved break. That well-deserved break turned into almost a year in South America of drugs and alcohol and a pretty pretty slippery slope, a downward spiral, for which it's going from being part of these elite units, doing a very demanding job in a high-risk situation, surrounded by people that you consider brothers. And it's a brotherhood, and you've got purpose. For whatever reason that purpose may be, I still think purpose is life's most elusive thing for so many people. And then all of a sudden, all that stops. Not only does it stop, but you're sitting to start to reflect on a country and a culture that's been flattened, and that you're a part of that system. And drugs and alcohol is a pretty easy way to zone out from all that shit. And for a lot of us guys, the real war doesn't start until the bullets stop and you're trying to reintegrate back into society. And not to take anything away from the real victims of the Iraq War, which are the Iraqi people. But for guys like us, it's hard to come back and you see guys trying to come back and reintegrate back into society, or just reintegrate back into their families. And you're trained to shoot someone from a mile away, and all of a sudden you're sitting there trying to drive an Uber and or flip burgers or something. And it's this, people don't understand that because they don't come from the world that we came from, and they it's not necessarily a badge of honor. It's the process that we've gone through. And it's hard. And a lot of guys, particularly, I spend a lot of time lecturing in America. I travel around the country there. I work for National Geographic, actually doing the Nat Geo Live talks, and I speak a lot about the plight of veterans that have come back from fighting the arguments of old men, and just never figure out the what next. And 22 US veterans a day commit suicide in America, Australia as well. In the last 6 months, I know of 5 people that I've worked with in units that I've been involved with that have committed suicide. And there's a strong push in Australia for a royal commission into why veterans have such a high suicide rate, and just don't seem to be supported well enough. When countries and governments want to send their children off to war to fight their arguments, they've got to be ready to pick up the pieces when these kids come home. I fortunately had, I hit rock bottom in South America, blowing tens of thousands of dollars of money on just traveling around drinking cocaine, and I don't know, not even, it started off as a self-reward of partying, and then just it became a numbing, it was a numbing process. And then fortunately, when I hit rock bottom, I was one of the lucky ones that bounced. A lot of guys don't. They choose to take their own lives. I'd heard about anti-poaching, and it seemed like a romantic adventure. Go to Africa for 6 months, and that was my ticket out of the situation I'd gotten myself into in South America. Bought a one-way ticket to South Africa. Literally, I didn't even. I moved my life to a new continent. I didn't even have a check-in bag when I got on the plane. I had a one-way ticket and I had a carry-on bag, and that was it. Started traveling around southern part of the continent, getting having meetings with people, and I was there for the wrong reasons, and probably would highlight the selfishness of me as a person up until that point in my life. I joined the military for adventure. I went to Iraq to make money, and I came to Africa looking for a fight, not a cause. I wanted to run around the bush and hunt poachers, and that's essentially what how I was selling myself to all these conservationists that I was meeting with. Look at me, look at the skills I've got. I can come out here and really help you guys. What I didn't realize, and I didn't take into consideration, and I was too short-sighted to do so, was that the people I was speaking to had been involved with conservation for decades, and they dedicated their lives to building up relationships with local communities and doing things the right way. And what they didn't need was some vigilante coming and running around, looking for their next set of pictures for social media. It took me 6 months of traveling around the continent and starting to learn more about conservation, and that it's not just about running around the bush trying to hunt poachers. And eventually got a a start with a unit, an anti-poaching unit in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, and just started working with these rangers, and they really inspired me. And I think at a time in my life when I was looking for inspiration, and I suppose 3 years in Iraq, and then the subsequent, trying to pick up the pieces afterwards, it really does start to reshape you and your mindset of who you are as a person. You become more open to perceiving things from different perspectives, and that's what Iraq had done to me. And when I looked at these rangers, for me, having come from Iraq, where we were working within a $600 billion a year annual defense budget, and we were looking after resources in the ground and dotted lines on a map, and we were getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to do that. And we had access to any equipment that we needed, to go from that to then see rangers, wildlife rangers who had given up everything in their lives, spending 11 months of the year away from their family, often had, most of them didn't even have basic uniforms or boots, radio communications, medical kits. And it just made me really reflect on not only my own priorities, but priorities as for us as a species, and how we put so much into this war machine and so little into protecting the natural world. And then in parallel with that was an experience of animals, not something that I'd ever really taken much notice of, other than trying to shoot them. Growing up, I can get into the hunting side of my adolescent years later in the interview if you want, but I used to hunt, and then after Iraq, knowing what it was like to be hunted, I never hunted again after Iraq, and Iraq had broken down the barriers, or this a lot of the macho armor that you put around yourself mentally and from an ego standpoint. Iraq had done a lot to break that down, and just seeing what had happened to those people and that country, and knowing that you were a part of that system that did that. I wouldn't say me looking for an avenue in supporting animals was a way to try and rectify bad things that I'd done in the past. It was a way for me to try and find a better use of the skills that I had. And, we saw animals that were being hunted by units using paramilitary tactics, crossing international borders, automatic weapons, heavy caliber rifles, hunting elephant, hunting rhino, so they could, an animal as big as a truck, killed for something you can hold in one hand. And I had a certain set of skills that I could pass on to rangers that could help them stop that. And that's how I got started back in 2009.
What was it like initially? What was the situation like where the poaching industry was concerned?
We shaped what we started to do, or what I was the organisation in the beginning, like literally one guy with a set of boots going out and training any rangers that would be that would listen. But the main thing that I focused on with the skill set I had was animals that were being targeted in the most aggressive way. And elephants and rhinos fell into that category because of the value of their horn, which is shipped predominantly to Asia, where it's used traditionally as part of traditional Chinese, traditional Vietnamese medicine, where it's been used as far back as 3,000 years for various ailments. But what we've seen more of now with the increase in value of rhino horn is it become a commodity within the black market. And being able to wear a bracelet made out of beads that have been carved from rhino horn is similar to being able to wear a Rolex watch. Or if we look at Vietnam, a rising economic superpower within Southeast Asia, who Vietnamese don't traditionally travel a lot. They stay at home and spend a rising disposable income on consumer-related goods. And rhino horn is one of those consumer-related goods that can demonstrate wealth, and particularly within elite business circles. And so we saw an increasing demand of rhino horn from the African continent to be shipped over there, predominantly to Vietnam and to China. Ivory, on the other hand, we're still sitting here today with somewhere between 30 and 40,000 elephants being killed per annum across the continent, and that is for carvings and ornaments. And again, Asia is where a lot of these carvings or raw products are being transported to. So, look, the number one thing I want in life is to be able to work. Where guys like me and the skills I've got and the jobs we have to do are no longer needed. But while there is a value on wildlife and natural resources, there's always going to be a need to police those. And that's in the early days of us as an organisation. And we've evolved, as I've evolved as a person, our organisation has evolved also from the early days where we're going out and doing the militarized version of conservation, being that last line of defense for these particular species.
What challenges did you face in the early days of starting the organization?
Huge challenges, and I'm grateful for every one of them. I suppose one of the big challenges that I had initially was being this Australian that came over and got involved with doing some conservation. We started getting a lot of media attention, mainly because I think, I was a foreigner that was doing it, my military background, and just, we just 60 Minutes did a story on us, and it sort of blew us up as an organisation. We started getting, more funding in a short space of time than what other organisations that had been around doing things for a lot longer had, and that created resentment from I think many angles in the industry as well. Also, probably I was too outspoken than what I should have been about my opinions in the early days, and we made a lot of enemies in the industry, and in an industry that is I often say the biggest problem we have with poaching in Africa is not necessarily a demand from Asia or a lack of resources. It's quite often an industry that can't work together, and it's people are fighting for projects, they're fighting for public attention, they're fighting for funding, and when someone new on the block comes in and starts getting some of those things in a short space of time, it creates enemies, it creates jealousy. So one of the toughest things I've had to, I suppose, deal with is getting a lot of industry on side, and we're now 11 years later, we've worked hard and we've gone back to the basics in terms of our projects and establishing bigger and larger and better projects, and let our work do the talking. And over time, the people that matter have gravitated towards what we do, and we've formed some great partnerships. But look, going back in hindsight, I probably would have done things differently, but you can't change things in hindsight. You can only learn from those lessons. But it is a very tough industry to operate in, particularly when I spent some time down in South Africa. It really is. And I know from other philanthropic industries, humanitarian industries, and also the animal rights movements. There's a lot of infighting amongst these charities and different initiatives. Look, the reality is there's so many good intentions and good efforts that are going on out there, and I think if we all supported each other much more and point the guns outwards instead of inwards, that we could achieve a whole lot more. But this is what we've got for ourselves to manage. The other major challenge for me came in 2012. I just finished investing what essentially was a liquidated property portfolio, my life savings, into the country of Zimbabwe. There was a journalist in Australia by the name of Raphael Epstein, who had information which alleged that Australian special forces were operating as spies in Zimbabwe. Now, the worst part about this is that I'd known Raphael Epstein and had done an interview with him previously, and where he got this information from about the military doing espionage work, I don't know, but he chose to run that story on the front page of the Australian newspaper. I was accused of espionage in a country where espionage carries a death sentence. I was fortunately outside of the country at the time. I was asked to come back and answer questions in relation to this. We lost a project which was going to be a 25-year resurrection project of one of the largest and most biodiverse national parks in the country. And that was all because of this one journalist that wanted to essentially put out an article, which, regardless of if it was true or not, why would you want to print something that would jeopardize the safety of your own countrymen who are out working, doing a tough job overseas? Even though what was in the article had nothing to do with me, there was a guilt by association because the military units that I'd been a part of before. So overnight, I lost everything. The house that I just built and was living in with a fiance at the time, we were out of the country. We were essentially trying to figure out where to start next. Now, for a lot of people, I suppose packing up and going home would be the easy thing to do. We used that to turn us from a Zimbabwean-focused organisation into a global organisation. We went to South Africa. We registered as a not-for-profit in South Africa. From South Africa, we identified a key project on the border of South Africa and Mozambique in the rhino wars, a project that would help protect a third of the world's remaining rhinos. We registered in Mozambique. To fund that project, we had to go into the world's biggest philanthropic market, which is the United States. We registered as a not-for-profit in the United States. So we essentially went from a small trust in Zimbabwe to which now become a growing global not-for-profit organisation with interests throughout Southern and East Africa. So look, we all get handed shit sandwiches in life, and the only way to get through a shit sandwich is to grab a corner and start chewing, man. And that's, when I was living in a backpacker's dormitory in a shit part of Johannesburg with a wife and a month-old baby, because I just lost my home and my life savings. Yeah, I mean, your back's to the wall. Hey, you got to find a way to make things work, and you just got to play the cards you dealt.
Well, that's what a journey, Damien. You've gone through a lot, and just to see where you are right now, just fighting in the front lines. I definitely want to go into your journey to veganism as well, because what my understanding was of when you started off as working in conservation against rhinos and elephants, you weren't actually vegan. So what actually caused you to make the switch or make the connection?
We used to do a music festival back home to raise funds for our projects. It was called Raw for Africa, and we had a volunteer committee. And on that volunteer committee, there were a few people who were vegetarian or vegan, and we were talking about what sort of food we're going to serve at these concerts. And I've still got copies of the emails actually, and it's quite fun. I'll publish them one day. Some of the bullshit excuses that people like I used to be make to suit the convenience of a flexible morality. And humans are fantastic creatures at making up excuses to justify things that I think deep down we know are not right. So the argument came across as, why are we serving meat at a festival that's designed to raise money to protect animals? My excuse would be, well, chickens aren't going extinct, cows aren't going extinct. And I'm doing so much work over there protecting these animals. Really, I've sort of earned the right to cook what we want and serve what we want at these festivals. And this argument went on from, I think we did the first one in 2010, 2011. What it did is it planted the seed with me to make me start questioning my value system. And I was starting to do more and more public speaking and media interviews in regards to protecting animals, protecting the environment. And I knew that what I was saying and how I was behaving were heading off in two different directions. And I was suppressing the truth. And I was asked to do, in late 2012, I was asked to give a TEDx talk at the Sydney Opera House, which TEDx for the Sydney Opera House is, in terms of conferences in Australia, it was a big deal. I hadn't done a lot of public speaking prior to then. So I started going around to schools and speaking at schools about the work that we do to try and get my head around public speaking and sort of get over yourself and standing in front of a crowd. And I would always say, when the principal would say, this is great work, what you're doing, we'll get you up at assembly. I said, no, I want to go and speak to each class individually, because then I get to practice. Instead of practicing once at each school, you get to practice 10 times. And if anyone out there that wants to get into public speaking, that is a brilliant way to do it, because kids are ruthless, man. They give you absolutely no latitude. If you don't have their attention, a good story, then they're going to smoke you out quickly. Hey. Anyway, I doing more and more research for what would eventually become will go on to be the talk that I would have to give in front of 2,500 people at a packed Sydney Opera House. I had 5 or 6 months to prepare, and it was during this research that I fell down the rabbit hole of our food sources, and I would say the 3 key things for my transition, and my transition was one that took years, but the 3 final things were a talk by Philip Wallen, who is a great inspiration for me, and also a mentor and financial supporter of the work that we do now. Gary Yourofsky, a talk that I think many people that have made the transition would have seen his talk on YouTube, and finally the movie Earthlings, produced by someone who's now become a great friend and also a mentor of mine, Sean Monson. So those 3 things triggered enough curiosity in me to want to know more, and the more I found out, the less I wanted to have to do with that food system. And it was an overnight switch from being a guy who used to I would eat my steak blue, like literally run it through a warm room, wrap it in bacon. I went from a hardcore barbecue expert to overnight to someone that has not touched meat since. I still consider it the single greatest thing I've done in my life in terms of decisions to be made. I've got no regrets about where I came from. Being the hunter, being the big meat eater, we are all products of our past, and our vulnerabilities are what make us human. And I'm able to speak to the person that I used to be in other people because I've walked that path and I've made a 180-degree transition. We got women and men that are out there at the moment risking their lives to protect animals, and they have to do it by carrying weapons in an environment where armed poachers are willing to kill them. The easiest way to protect an animal, the rest of the world doesn't need to pick up a gun and go out in the bush and defend animals with their lives. The easiest way to protect animals, don't stick them in your mouth. Now, for me as a conservationist, run a conservation organization, the meat industry is the greatest negative environmental impact we have on this planet. So if we want to talk about conservation, then it can't be 9 to 5. I need to bring the work home to the dinner table. And that's for me as an individual, and as an organization. Our rangers are working, functioning on a plant-based diet. It's a very important part of what we do because we walk the talk.
Same for me. I literally turned vegan overnight over Sean Monson's film Earthlings, and I was a kilo a day as well. So fully understand that. And you mentioned the women, and you mentioned the movie Earthlings as well. So I understand that upcoming in the months ahead or weeks ahead, maybe Akashinga will be released. Maybe you could just give us a little bit of a rundown and what this movie is about and why you decided to do this.
So Akashinga, which translates in local Shona dialect to the brave ones, it's a name that the women gave for themselves, but it's a program that was, again, born out of the pressure of trying to find a different way to do things. We were working along the border of South Africa and Mozambique in what was quite a big operation that we set up, a very militarized operation in stopping poachers from coming through from Mozambique into the heart of the highest concentration of population of rhino in the world in southern Kruger National Park, an area that was accounting for around 70% of rhino deaths on the planet each year. And our ground level offensive against the local population there, where these syndicates, poaching syndicates, were operating out of, involved helicopters, drones, canine attack teams, big offences, more guns. We stopped poachers from coming through, and we helped drive a downturn, a global downturn, in a joint operation with Mozambique and South African forces. We were able to drive a downturn in 2016, which was the first time in a decade that there'd been a downturn. We got a lot of kudos, we got a lot of credit for it, for playing our role in what was a bigger picture. But we were having a sustained and ongoing battle with the local communities. The UN Population Division projects that there'll be 2 billion people on the African continent by 2040. We needed to find a way to get the communities on side, not to have a sustained war with them. And conservation as an industry, through desperation and as a last resort, has become increasingly militarized in many areas. And we see in Virunga National Park, with 13 rangers assassinated there only a few weeks ago. It's rightly so that in some places you need to have a certain level of training and resources there. But there are other ways to approach conservation, and those other ways would go against everything that I had done up until 2017 when we decided to start this program, Akashinga. I had come from elite military units that were all male units, the only all male units in the military. And by that stage, by 2017, I'd built a career across 3 continents in training men for frontline combat, and training hard men and putting them through their paces. And not all of them, our job is to try and make them fail. And the ones that don't fail are the ones that are ready. And women had never featured in that equation. I'd never trained women. I'd never worked with women on any deployment or any operation. But we saw growing movements in other industries of women getting more involved with management in CEO positions, on boards of directors, and seeing those industries progressing, seeing those industries doing better and making better decisions. We saw all-female teams being used in Iraq and Afghanistan to go in and sit and negotiate with village elders and traditional leaders, because the trust had been completely lost from male units, because there's only so many times you can kick someone's door in and put a gun in their face and then sit there and try and have a conversation. And the women were able to re-establish trust that had been broken. And we looked at conservation as an industry that had becoming increasingly militarized and antagonistic with surrounding indigenous communities. And on the ground, women are outnumbered around 100 to 1 in field operations. So they're not giving access to the experience they need to rise up through the ranks and fulfill management positions in a role where they need to make decisions that can ultimately decide that, if someone lives or dies. And when you've got to make those decisions, you need to have experience behind you. So if women weren't getting that experience, they weren't being able to genuinely rise into those management positions. And without that opportunity, I think conservation stood to be left behind and unable to progress in a certain direction. We decided to trial this program. And we tried in many areas, and we just could not get it off the ground because nobody wanted to accept the responsibility. Even a reserve that we'd worked on in Victoria Falls on the Stanley Livingstone Private Game Reserve, we'd worked there for 7 years. We hadn't lost a single animal. And all we proposed to management there was, can we employ 4 women to work in an unarmed capacity to protect the fence line? And they still said no. And so we hit a dead end in terms of trying to create this opportunity for women. That again led us in a different direction, where we started to look at trophy hunting as an industry in Africa. Now, trophy hunting across many areas is a shrinking or dying industry. And the reason, there's three primary reasons as I see it. The first one is there's shrinking wildlife populations across many of the larger, more iconic ecosystems. So there's less animals to shoot. There's changing in policy and regulations surrounding the export of certain trophies. For example, America used to export or used to supply about half of the clientele that would come to Zimbabwe and shoot elephants here and take those elephants back to America. The US Fish and Wildlife Service banned the importation of Zimbabwean to America, which cut out half the clientele overnight. So you've got a shrinking customer base. And the third one is just a younger generation raised on social media that doesn't want to get on a plane anymore and fly across the world to shoot an animal and hanging above the fire. It's just not cool anymore. So what that means is that all the areas that have been set aside for hunting no longer have as much clients coming in to shoot these animals, which means the land that is owned by local communities, and they've used hunting as an economic model to motivate conservation, that land is either going to be lost to human settlement, to agriculture, to mining, unless the community can find a way to generate an income from it and keep it in its natural state. So anyway, we found one of these abandoned trophy hunting areas in Zimbabwe, in the lower Zambezi ecosystem. Hunting had failed because all the animals had been shot out. There were no staff left there. It was owned by the community, and they were starting to encroach into that area to cut down the trees and set up there. They were essentially going to live there. Now, my thing with conservation, what I want to achieve when my time has come, is I want to be able to sit back and say I help protect as much of the natural world as possible. And hold on to what would otherwise be lost. And I think in terms of conservation, the biggest gains to be made is protecting something that would otherwise be lost. And I think sometimes lost causes are the only ones worth fighting for. And these hunting areas were essentially lost causes. They have different status to national parks. National parks are part of a centralized government system. Whereas the communal hunting areas are owned by the community. And 20% of the entire landmass of Zimbabwe is set aside as communal hunting areas. You're talking about millions and millions and millions of hectares of biodiversity importance that for us as a species. And to paraphrase the E.O. Wilson, one of the most foremost biologists of our times, perhaps since Darwin, to paraphrase his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Half Earth, we need to set aside 50% of the planet for nature for us to stop our acceleration into the sixth mass great extinction on this planet, which for the first time is a human-made phenomenon. So we need to be preserving land, not losing it. We currently have 17% of Earth's surface set aside for nature. We need to get it up to 50. So we want to try and hold on to these areas, not let them go. So when we found this abandoned trophy hunting area, we went and met with the chiefs and the traditional leaders and said, we want to trial this all-female anti-poaching program. They said, this is one, any job that's available is a man's job, and two, particularly the job of a ranger is for men. And we explained our reasons why, and they eventually granted us a 72-hour period to do a selection program for these women. And the criteria that we set for the women that would come to selection was based on initially just wanting to give the ones that needed an opportunity the most to grant that opportunity. And when I'd first arrived in Zimbabwe in 2009, it had the lowest life expectancy in the world for a woman, and that was 34 years of age. And so that has improved since 2009, but when we set the criteria for this program, we said we want to create an opportunity for women that are survivors of serious sexual assault, domestic violence, AIDS orphans, single mothers, and abandoned wives. And we had 87 women come down during the initial pre-selection interviews. Those women were ridiculed on the way, walking through the villages. They were told to go back home. They were told to go back to the fields, the families, the kitchen, basically go back to where they belong. But they still came, and we sat down through those interviews. And look, for me, who has, in my 40 years on this planet, seen and heard my fair share of stuff, listening to the interviews of those 87 women was one of the toughest things I've had to sit through, and hearing their stories. And those stories were being verified by the village elders that came and sat through the interviews at the same time. And those women weren't victims of circumstance. They were mostly victims of men, and what had happened in their lives. And it made me, I suppose, in a way, ashamed, not because I'd been a part of something directly against those women, but because I'd been part of a system and that had kept women like that suppressed. In our own military units, when we had studies done on us when we're in the clearance diving branch on integrating women into our ranks, and in a locker room discussion, we said we'd rather make our own entrance standards harder than work alongside women. So this was the sort of culture that we had, this boys club, and I suppose special operations is society's ultimate boys club. And that culture is also very present in a patriarchal society of rural Zimbabwe. Anyway, so from the 87 women, we chose 37 to start a 72-hour selection period that would be modeled on special forces selection. You learn the most about someone when they don't think they're being watched, and you just put them through a number of physical and mental challenges. The 4 pillars of misery: to be hungry, cold, tired, and wet, and see how people perform under those conditions. And what I saw was remarkable, and it shifted my perception very quickly on how I'd perceived women up until that point. What we didn't realize with the selection criteria that we established for those women to come down, what we didn't realize is we're getting society's toughest. And that's all we need with Ray. I need 2 things. I need character and I need spirit. The rest I can train. And with these women, that's what we got. We got character and spirit. We got it in spades.
And I understand that since they got training from you and the organization, rape cases actually dipped.
There's been an amazing sort of form of social engineering that's been taking place since the program started almost 3 years ago now. We from day one, where the women were ridiculed, now they've elevated themselves to this sort of rock star status in their communities because of just the way they conduct themselves. They're doing one of the toughest jobs in one of the most remote and harshest locations, and they're thriving at it. And while every male in the community may not like the fact that these women were the ones that got the job after 191 arrests, actually 192 now, they made an arrest last night. After that many arrests, those that don't like it, they still respect it. And to see these women go back into the schools that some of them had only graduated from a few years ago, and to be mobbed by young boys and young girls like rock stars, but to see the way that they conduct themselves and the message that they send throughout the community, it is social engineering. And the chief of police who told us, since the program started, there's been an increasing amount of historical reporting of sexual assault cases. So women feeling more confident to come forward and say, this is what's happened to me in the past. But he said, since this program has started in the communities where we work or alongside where we do all our employment from, he said there's been a 60% reduction in recorded rape cases. So, yeah, and that's women standing up for themselves, women being able to fight back, women seeing the example that these other women have set. And I don't want to condone violence. This is a community-based program where women have naturally de-escalated so much tension. My background is counterinsurgency warfare, and that is the job of looking for a fight and finishing it. Women tend to want to talk to a problem before they shoot it or blow it up, and that's a far better way to have a relationship with a community that outnumbers you by tens of thousands, living alongside an area you're trying to protect with minimal resources. So the women's ability to naturally de-escalate tension means that we are demilitarizing a lot of the ways that we've done things in the past. And instead of relying on military hardware, we're relying on interpersonal relationships that are driven by the women at household level, into communities where their parents were raised, their grandparents were raised, the communities they're going to raise their own children, communities that these women have a long-term vested interest in. But there are cases of the women having to stand up for themselves, and we hope for the best, we prepare for the worst. Of the 192 arrests that they've made, there's only been shots fired once, which again shows you the natural ability driven through the value systems of women to be able to de-escalate tension and approach law enforcement from a different way. There are stories there. Look at a woman like Dionette, who was taken at the age of 14 as a child bride, bashed, raped repeatedly, had 4 children by the time she was 19. The situation deteriorated so bad that she was taken away by the chief from her husband and her family and sent back to live with her grandmother because it was too traumatic what she was going through there. She came on and started working with us as a ranger. Eventually, she went back to the house where her children were. She had a team of the women that waited outside. She went into the house and she kicked the shit out of her ex-husband, kicked him out of the house, and she took the house and her children back, and the husband hasn't been seen again since. You've got a woman like Kelly, who was raped at 16 and had a child to the rapist. And in Shona culture, if you cannot afford to look after the child is taken from you and given to the parents of the father. When Kelly joined us as a ranger, she hadn't seen her child, her daughter. Her daughter's name is Yearn Cleopatra. She hadn't seen Yearn for 2.5 years. And Kelly came to us. She graduated as a ranger. She saved her money. She bought some land. She built a house. And then we took this case to court together, and she won full custody of her daughter back and brought that daughter back into the house that she'd built with the money that she'd saved. So every one of these women has a story, hey? And that's what this program is, Akashinga. It's not just about conservation. It's when these women came in, the first thing we asked them is we said, we didn't say, here's a uniform, here's a gun, we're going to go and train you to go and protect this area. The first thing we asked them, we said, what are your dreams? Or what do you want to do in life? And that's what this program is. It's an opportunity for them to do whatever it is they want to do. Some women have gone on to university. Some women have trained to become anti-poaching instructors. Some women's dreams were to get their families and children back together. And that's what they've been able to do through this program. And we shifted the entire strategy on nature conservation. We put women's empowerment at the center of the strategy. It's the greatest traction in community development, and conservation becomes a byproduct of happy communities. We also get to use conservation funding as the most effective form of community development funding, which is women's empowerment. Historically, we would recruit men from around the country, and we would bring them in to defend an area from the local population. And the reason that we brought in people from outside is we wanted to avoid corruption. If Denmark sits number 1, Zimbabwe sits 160 out of 180 countries on the Global Corruption Index. So corruption is a big problem here. So bringing in men from areas far away was a way for us to avoid them colluding with family members they may have grown up with on where they might be patrolling, or where high-value species such as elephant or rhino might be. But what that did is it dispersed the largest line items in our budget, which is ranger salaries. It dispersed that around the country. Now with women, we started with 16 women. This program now has 171 staff, 120 of which are women. All the security roles, be it rangers or scouts, are women. All the command, so we've basically tried to shift all of the roles where if corruption was involved, it would cause a problem, we've shifted all those roles to women. We haven't had a single incidence of corruption with the women in nearly 3 years. So as we scale, it means we can continue to employ directly from the community next door to the area we're trying to protect. And it turns the largest line item in our budget from something that was being dispersed around the country into villages hundreds of kilometers away. It's turning it into a direct community investment into the area right next door to the wilderness area we're patrolling. On paper, we're putting the same amount into that community every 34 days as what trophy hunting was able to do per annum. So we have a viable economic alternative to trophy hunting, which for us is only working with women at the center of the strategy. The bottom line then triple gears because women spend 80 to 90% of their salary on family and local community versus a male that spends 30 to 40%. So look, I mean, for us, we found a way to use conservation funding as the most effective form of community development funding. Women and the way they de-escalate tension in conducting law enforcement have become the bridge that an increasingly militarized conservation industry had to rebuild back into communities. And I'll say a small group of women have achieved what few armies in history have been able to do, and that is to win the hearts and minds of a local population.
Well, Damien, that's incredibly inspiring, and I really look forward to this film coming out, because just hearing the stories of these women and where they've come from, the tragedy and all that they've been through, and the spirit that they've kind of built through the years, I can imagine they're forced to be reckoned with, and I'm sure this film will do them justice and the work that you do. I can't wait for it to come out, because I saw the trailer and it looked epic. But beyond that, I think what you shared is just the stories behind them and the impact that they've had in the community. So speaking of impact, for the Plant-Fit Summit listeners and audience right now, so they watch this, and what is the one thing or nugget of wisdom that you would like to share with them to make an impact in their own lives and the world at large?
Impact comes in auditing yourself, I suppose, and making decisions that matter. I myself have always been able to reflect back on who I am and what I do, and be able to make big changes in a short space of time if I feel there's a better way that I can live my life. We look at nature. Nature has had billions of years to evolve, and we as humans, we have a simple lifetime, and evolution is cutting away the bits that don't work and keeping the bits that do, and learning from our experiences. That's what evolution is. Nature's had billions of years. We maybe got 60 or 70, maybe 80 if we're lucky. Cut away the bits that don't work, keep the bits that do, and grow. And I mean, for me, that's been getting involved with conservation, growing our programs, growing this organization into what's now becoming a leading conservation organization. It doesn't just lead from the front in terms of how we go about our business on the ground, but all our rangers, our women doing this extremely tough and respected role in a remote and hostile location and thriving on a plant-based diet. It's about doing what we know, what our conscience tells us is right. And I suppose following our conscience is the best message I can give anyone. And I know, speaking to a lot of people, that for us, when the shutters come up, they never go down again. Because the truth is accumulative. And my advice to everybody out there who see things through the same lens that you and I see through, which can be for people that don't see through that lens of our perception of animals and their same want, the same desire to build family structures, to be safe, to be free from harm. For people that haven't got that yet, when we try to communicate our message to them, it can seem like we're speaking to a brick wall. My advice is to keep having your conversations, okay? Because the truth is accumulative, and it may take a day to transition someone from where they are to the right side of history, or it may take 10 years, but the truth will always win. If we just keep getting better at your message, keep getting better at telling your story. You may feel as though it's falling on deaf ears, but I can tell you now, the initial conversations that people had with me almost a decade ago when I did not want to listen to a single thing they had to say. Those conversations stuck with me. And eventually they created a crack, and that crack got bigger. And here I am today. So keep having your conversations, keep getting better at them, and never give up. We're fighting a war that is never going to be fully won. But we just got to keep going. Hey, every forward step that we make is a positive change for the lives of animals that are out there and nature. I think if we look at the situation we're in now, as a global community, we've got hundreds of thousands of people that are dying. We've got millions of people out of work, billions of people in lockdown. We're talking a global deficit of between $7 and $9 trillion on the other side of this pandemic. If we just invest some time and some money into looking after nature in the first place, she's not going to kick us in the ass so badly.
Love it, Damien. Thank you very, very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thanks to all your listeners. For those that want to know more about what we do, we've got a website, the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, IAPF.org. We are a not-for-profit organisation. Of course, we're funded by people around the world. We're grateful for any support and keeping our growing team of rangers out there, not only as the last line of defence for nature, but I also think the last line of defense for humanity. We're talking about stopping wet markets, where our job is to stop animals from reaching there in the first place. So yeah, please get on, learn more, keep having conversations, keep getting better at them, and get involved with nature conservation. It's our future. Thanks, man.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. A wise man once said, "You make a new life by making new choices." Now, if you know that what you eat matters, if you know that health comes from healthy living, then the time to make new choices is now. And just imagine owning the summit for life. Click the button for more. Maybe you know our stories. Luke and I lost family to cancer, and we wish we would have known sooner what you are learning here today. So please, share the summit, take action, and let's support each other. Thank you. This is Toby and Luke signing off, and we can't wait to see you for the next presentation.